Hi, welcome back to FinTech Festival India, everyone. As widespread worldwide adoption of smartphones continues, mobile transactions, contactless payments, peer-to-peer payments, and mobile banking have skyrocketed. How should organizations approach mobile applications and mobile devices to better secure these modern transactions in an increasingly mobile connected and regulated world? To answer this question, we are joined by Tim Hartog, mobile payment security expert, Zimperium. Tim will be giving a presentation on the beating heart of FinTech, why mobile security must be at the center of FinTech's future. So welcome to FinTech Festival India, Tim. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Gitanjali. So my screen is shared. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the presentation on why mobile security must be at the center of FinTech's future. I'm Tim Hartog. My background is information security and mobile security. I've recently joined Zimperium, and we are an industry-leading mobile security company. We help enterprises secure their mobile endpoints, and we help app developers with securing their mobile applications. Prior to Zimperium, I worked for a mobile security pen testing lab for 8 years, and I was closely involved in all sorts of payment certification and mobile payment certification with EMVCO, PCI, as well as other standardization bodies like a global platform for the TE security certification. The agenda for the webinar today will be an introduction into payment and the transition to mobile. We'll address the mobile security threat landscape. We will do a deep dive into what the current state of attackers is and how this applies to application developers and enterprises having mobile payment solutions. We will dive into the security compliance standards, or a few of them, which are applicable in this space, including the related application security aspects. And last, we will address the security best practices for application developers in the FinTech space. So the transition to mobile in payments. What we've effectively seen in the past decade is that mobile devices and smartphones have increasingly become more important in our day-to-day life. On average, a person spends about 4 hours per day on their smartphone. Every smartphone has approximately 100 apps installed, and they're used for a wide variety of purposes. Anything ranging from socials like messengers, calling, email or social media, to gaming, high value content like the Netflix or these type of applications. And increasingly, especially with the COVID pandemic, also for work purposes in context of bring your own device, remote working, remote access to enterprise data, such as Office 365, CRM systems, or simply other corporate network and data. But increasingly also for more financial topics and authentication topics. So think of using your smartphone to get into transport systems, to identify yourself for both private organizations, but also for governmental services like EID or other similar things. Nowadays, we can even lock and unlock our car or locate our car with our smartphone. And last but not least, the financial industry has also significantly transformed its way of operating to smartphones and mobile applications. So if we have a look at the different facets of payment, we've seen that the different aspects of payment essentially all went or transitioned to smartphones and mobile apps. Examples are mobile banking. You don't typically go to the actual physical building anymore, but you use your mobile banking app. You can make payments with your smartphone, either tokenized or through QR codes. There's possibilities to do peer-to-peer payments directly between consumers, also consumer to merchant and the other way around. We use our smartphone to make online purchases. And in the past years, even the acceptance devices, the payment terminals, are transitioning to smartphone-based acceptance applications, essentially. What we see underneath is that this is actually driven by two factors. One side is, for instance, financial inclusion. Almost everyone has a smartphone, but not everyone has access to financial services. With these mobile apps, this is becoming more and more available to everyone across the globe. But from a security perspective, what we see is that the actual solutions or devices which are used to facilitate these transactions have transitioned from built-for-purpose devices, where security has been a core aspect in the solution to make or receive a payment, to mobile apps which are running on consumer-grade smartphones, commercial off-the-shelf devices, which have not been built for the purpose of making payments. And this effectively introduces new security risks, which were prior essentially solved by the former solutions which were used. For instance, smart cards, there are highly secured. Physical payment terminals are built from early design with security in mind. And this has not been the case with mobile apps. So if we dive into the mobile security threat landscape, what we see is that there are a wide variety and constant stream of vulnerabilities, 0 days, examples of exploits, both on the level of devices, like Samsung devices recently, which were shipped with flawed encryption, which would allow you to either get access to the data or the encryption keys. Samsung is not the only example there. This essentially applies to every smartphone OEM. Smartphone apps which were deployed through app stores, which put data of users at risk. Two examples of mobile malware, which were essentially used to collect credit card data, personal user credentials, which were used for logging into your banking account, etc. If we then zoom in a little bit into the banking domain or the financial domain, we see that the current state of malware and banking trojans is strongly focused on banking apps or payment apps. And they're typically used to steal user credentials, banking passwords, or credit card details in order to make fraudulent transactions, empty bank accounts, or perform card not present fraud. While these type of Trojans do already cause quite significant level of fraud, it is expected that with the transition to digital, these type of attacks and fraud on mobile solutions will increase as the transition from a cash-based economy to a cashless economy is continuing, and the reliance on these mobile solutions is essentially increasing. From an attacker perspective, it's often good to think of them as an organization, while it be a criminal organization. And they typically go for a return on investment, low-hanging fruit they can exploit, or attacks which will result in a business case for them, where the investments they have to make where the investments they have to make brings a sufficient return on investment, essentially, with the gains of their fraudulent activities. If we look at the impact of mobile app compromise, it's typically quite varied for enterprises or organizations. There can be impact on the revenue which you generate. Think, for instance, of impacting of revenue due to IP theft, which essentially enables your competitors to build similar solutions like you have, where you have significantly invested in R&D to build your solutions, and your tech or your competitors simply steal that IP. Revenue can also be impacted by fines in case of disclosure of sensitive data or personal identifiable information. There can be brand damage resulting in lower confidence or disabandonment of customer loyalty. You have cases of fraud, all sorts of different effects from mobile app compromise, which have a direct impact on the revenue your brand reputation, your assets as a company, etc. Continuing. So who do you actually need to protect from as an enterprise, or maybe even as a developer? On one side, it's the criminal organizations who are trying to perform fraud by whatever ways they have at their disposal to exploit your applications, your solutions, or the associated backend systems. So those are criminal organizations. It's phishing parties. It can be identity thieves. Any type of malicious actor involved in trying to attempt to perform fraud with the solutions you offer to the market. But this is from an external perspective, and that's not the only attacker service or threat service you have to take into consideration. It's also the developers which are inadvertently introducing vulnerabilities in the applications you're essentially providing to the market. No solution will be ever 100% secure, and vulnerabilities are always introduced in applications. But at some point in time, there's a balance between how difficult it is for an attacker versus the actual return on investment from an attacker point of view for these type of applications. Also, the end users can pose a threat essentially to you as an enterprise due to poor cyber hygiene. You don't know what the end user does with its smartphone, whether they have rooted their smartphone or jailbroken their smartphone, what other type of applications they're installing there. And in some cases, there can also be malicious intent from an end user perspective to compromise their own applications. Next to that, you also have to take into account the regulators for specific domains, especially in FinTech. There is typically stronger regulation due to the dependency of the economy or the complete society on the services we provide. So also take into consideration the different regulatory schemes and requirements and the impact they can have on you as an enterprise. So where do the risks actually arise? Essentially, in a nutshell, it's at two phases. On one side is pre-release. So at the moment, you're still developing the solution prior to publishing the apps or the solutions in the App Store. And the other one is post-release. At the moment, the application is actually being used by your consumers. Pre-release, the risk can be introduced by third-party code. You don't know what you're actually integrating. Is it actually safe? Does it not contain any vulnerabilities which you're not aware of, or which can be become apparent at the moment it starts interacting with your own solution. Also your own proprietary code which you're integrating in the application. Is your IP sufficiently protected? Are your own investments in the solution properly protected? How about sensitive data you're processing with your application? How do you make sure that your customer data is safe? And of course, the different compliance mandates from a privacy perspective, but also typically from a financial regulator perspective. Post-release, it's good to realize that at the moment you publish your application, there are different ways that malicious actors can interact with your application. That can be through eavesdropping in networks if you don't properly secure your communication channels between your app and other apps, but also between your app and the backend systems. There can be malware, which is trying to scrape screens, which is trying to interact with your application, trying to steal OTP data, etc. There can be cases of reverse engineering of your app. So at the moment your app is published, essentially anyone can download the application and start reversing it to understand how it works, to extract keys or to extract sensitive data or to extract the logic inside the application, etc. In essence, the applications running on the different handsets are outside of your control at the moment you release the application to the market. And what you need essentially is to be able to detect that your application is running in an untrusted environment, and the application has to defend itself. So how are apps typically being targeted? There are different ways from an attacker perspective how they can interact or target or compromise your apps. From what we've seen, this overview lists a few of the common examples. One of them is, for instance, compromised storage. What we saw is that different cloud and on-device storage is actively being compromised. We recently discovered thousands of apps which were using unsecure cloud storage, essentially allowing attackers to access all the data which was stored in these unsecure cloud storage solutions. We've seen different types of compromise of communication. Think of data which is manipulated or lost due to lack of secure channels with your backend systems, or lack of authentication of your backend systems. We've seen examples of apps being repackaged, which essentially means that an attacker takes your legitimate app, they reverse engineer it, they add their own additional malicious code, and they repackage it as being your legitimate app, and they post it again on the App Store, where the actual people who download these apps are not aware that they're downloading a maliciously modified application instead of your legitimate application. Other examples are malware on the phone, which try to scrape the screens, which try to extract the user credentials or the other ways of authentication from a user perspective towards these applications. And application cloning or tampering are also actively being used as ways to compromise mobile applications. So why is it so easy to target mobile apps? On one side, mobile apps are freely available in app stores. Anyone can simply download your application, extract the APK or API file, and start reversing the files inside there, and understand what's happening inside the application. These type of inspection tools, decompilers, etc., are quite cheap, if not even open source. Think of JetX, JEP, versions of IDA. These tools are readily available, and they're not necessarily expensive, which makes them well used or widely used by attackers. Secondly, it's not only the tools which are used for reversing, but also tools which are expert tools which are used to compromise or attack the actual applications. Think of tools like Cydia or Frida or Magisk. These tools are open source, they're readily available, and attackers can essentially use them to analyze or manipulate your applications. One of the challenges here typically is that your applications are running on end-user devices where your visibility on these end-user devices is typically limited. You don't know whether the user is actively updating with security patches these end-user devices. In practice, these end-user devices can connect with all sorts of networks, including rogue Wi-Fi networks, for instance. The actual posture of these smartphones is also quite diverse, meaning that there are thousands of different models of smartphones where the different capabilities of these smartphones also differs. Many versions of these smartphones will run outdated operating systems or still have access to security patches, but where the end user is not actually patching them. What we've also seen is that these security patches, depending on where the actual vulnerabilities lie, are not being applied actively, or they're simply missing, meaning they're not patched at all. And in some cases, for instance, when it touches really the operating system or the secure part of the operating systems, like the trusted execution environments, there can be a significant delay from the moment the vulnerabilities are identified or even published to the moment they are patched, due to the whole ecosystem and the different players involved here. From a developer perspective, it's also not feasible to test all these devices. There are thousands and thousands of different devices, and it's simply not possible to test all of them. To give you an indication, there are only already hundreds, if not thousands, different brands and over 24,000 different distinct Android devices. Having said that, we have also seen that security knowledge on how to develop secure applications is often not a priority or not a skill set for many developers. This doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, but it really depends on the nature of your application. And if your application is sensitive from any perspective, being subject to fraud or dealing with personal identifiable information or containing your IP as an enterprise, then the interest for you as an enterprise to secure these applications is significantly higher. Meaning that security expertise and putting priority for that in the development process is becoming more important. So in a nutshell, as a developer, you cannot expect the mobile platform to protect your mobile application. The application essentially has to protect itself and also to provide visibility to your developers or risk teams or fraud management teams on what's actually happening during runtime with the application and the platform it's running on. If we look at different compliance considerations and the impact or requirements towards application security, we will see that there has been more and more awareness on the need of application security. And what we'll do in the next section is go through a few of these security standards or compliance standards and see how they are dealing with the different facets of application security. So one type of financial applications are mobile wallets. When when Apple launched Apple Pay in 2014, Google quickly answered the developments by Apple by also opening up the NFC interface for third-party developers. And essentially that set loose a development, widespread development for both smartphone OEMs as well as third-party application developers to start developing mobile wallets, tokenized wallets using the NFC interface to interact with the payment terminal. EMVCo, which has traditionally been one of the industry standards for smart card security as a way for a consumer to make a payment, has adapted to that industry development by defining the certification program for software-based mobile payment. This program essentially originated from the different programs which other card brands were already running from 2014, like the parties like Visa, MasterCard, Discover, JCB, China UnionPay, American Express, etc. And the SBMP program essentially was developed to create an industry standard of what the card brands, international but also domestic, are doing prior. So this standard, this certification scheme has been launched in December 2018, and it essentially applies to the different solution providers and component providers for tokenized or QR code based payment solutions. Think of mobile wallet providers or mobile SDK, mobile payment SDK providers, smartphone OEMs, think of the likes of Huawei, Samsung, Apple, LG prior, but also Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, Google itself. When they develop mobile wallets, they can also use this certification scheme and the requirements there to assure that the security of their solution is sufficient. Then there are different solution or enablers essentially for security. Think of TE providers. Those are typically the smartphone system on chip providers, parties like Qualcomm, but also Samsung, prior also Trustonic, Huawei. They are providing what we call a trusted execution environment, which is beneficial or used by these smartphone OEMs to develop their solutions. The certification process here is not so much focused on the application security countermeasures, but more on how the developer makes sure that the protection of the payment assets is assured during the life cycle of the application. And the protection that means protection from a confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity perspective. In practice, developers, depending on whether you're a smartphone OEM or a third-party application developer, can use different techniques, which I will address later, to secure these applications. But in practice, for third-party developers, this is the majority of the bunch. They rely on techniques like obfuscation, root detection, debug detection, tamper detection, instrumentation detection, device binding, means to protect the cryptographic keys and cryptographic processes, as well as attestation, so the ability to have runtime visibility of what's happening with your application and the environment in which it's running. Those are all means by which application developers are assuring that the payment assets are properly protected inside the application. The relevant threats which these wallet developers have to protect against are, for instance, the abuse of user credentials, the abuse or theft of card information, which would enable card-not-present fraud, the abuse of payment keys. So, even while this is a tokenized solution, typically, these tokens are simply cryptographic keys which can be used to sign any arbitrary transaction. So if you get access to these payment keys, you can essentially perform fraud with that. And doing that with one payment key for one single transaction, that's not a problem. But at the moment you can scale this, so get access to a constant stream of payment keys and sign arbitrary transactions. This is the moment where the fraud scales and it becomes a significant threat, essentially, for the parties involved, from the card networks to the issuing banks. So this is what Invico is focusing on, and you see that underlying there's a strong focus on application security and the different mechanisms which can be used to do that. In 2021, the Reserve Bank of India introduced something similar, not necessarily for mobile wallets, but essentially for mobile payment applications and mobile banking applications. The way this is written down in the Master Direction for Digital Payment Security Controls is that it defines different controls for mobile payment applications. And these controls essentially apply to all the regulated entities. Think of commercial banks, small finance banks, payment banks, credit card issuing banks, all those parties which are offering mobile banking applications or mobile payment applications towards their consumers. What you'll see in the security controls there is that similar countermeasures, as were also mentioned prior with Invico, think of code obfuscation, runtime protections such as root detection, debug detection, emulation detection, as well as device binding and malware detection. They're also explicitly mentioned in the security controls for mobile payment applications for developers to take them into consideration in their application development. Last but not least, we have PCI. So this is the other side of the spectrum, not the issuing side, but the acquiring side. And what we've seen there is a complete transition from hardware-based terminals to software applications. So until a few years ago, let's say 2018, PCI primarily had physical payment terminals in their portfolio. And since then, we've seen with the introduction of PCI SPOC, so using your smartphone to enter the PIN, but having that connected to a secure card reader to actually interact with the card. And subsequently PCI CPOC. So at that moment in time, you could tap your payment card to your smartphone. Now to actually the upcoming PCI standard, being PCI MPOC, where you can essentially have full functionality of a traditional physical payment terminal, but then inside a consumer smartphone, a commercial off-the-shelf smartphone with PIN capabilities inside the same application. Applicable here, so code obfuscation, root detection, debug detection, device binding, platform attestation, the whole bunch. If we look at what is available for a mobile app developer, there are essentially three technologies which are available to app developers or which are available in the handset, but each of them has its own constraints. I will not go through them in depth, but the key point here is that many developers often think they can make use of the trust execution environment or secure element, but in practice this is limited to the smartphone OEMs because as a third-party app developer, it is almost infeasible to get access or the rights to load your applications inside the TE or inside the secure element. So what users or what mobile developers are essentially left with is protecting their applications by means of software protection and potentially common hardware-based features which are applicable on the smartphone. If we then dive into software security, then you can question how can you actually secure applications when you don't trust the underlying platform. The application essentially needs to protect itself across a wide variety of platforms, being Android and iOS, but also different versions of the operating systems, ranging from low-end devices, which lack any form of hardware-backed capabilities, to high-end devices, which have much more support for developers to develop secure applications. So first, you want to assure that you delay an attacker in reversing your application. So you apply code obfuscation. And depending on how relevant this is for your application, you should consider strong code obfuscation because there's quite a difference in what the different tools can provide for you as a developer. You aim to prevent that even if an attacker is able to reverse it, an attacker is still being delayed or hindered in actually tampering with the application. So you embed all sorts of countermeasures or mitigations against routing, debugging, instrumenting, etc. The same for cryptographic keys and crypto operations. You want to assure that these keys and crypto operations can't be manipulated or keys can be extracted. And one way of doing that is, for instance, with white box cryptography. Fourthly, you want to have threat visibility. So runtime detection and visibility, what's actually happening in the handset. And if there are any manipulations being attempted to the application, and report that back to your backend in such a way that you can make policy decisions there. For secure user interaction, you could make use of the biometric capabilities or TUI capabilities if the device supports that. But this is more dependent on the handsets themselves, as not every smartphone provides this level of support for developers. The common denominator here is that these security mechanisms in isolation will delay an attacker to some extent. But by combining them, you significantly strengthen the overall security of the mobile application. So we're nearing the end of the presentation. We have some best practices left for application developers. This is a view from Gartner on DevSecOps or DevOps. And I will not explain the entire model here, but what it essentially means is that you have a continuous feedback flow from design to implementation, to production, to deployment, back to all things you monitor and improving your application, etc. If you want to translate that to actual best practices, things you can actively do or consider as a developer, make sure that you understand what your assets are and be aware what you want to protect. Follow secure app best practices, like if you know what your assets are, make sure that they're encrypted, they're protected. Make sure that you know what your APIs are and protect these significantly or sufficiently. Make sure to perform a risk analysis on your application and what sort of threat it can pose to your users, but also to you as an enterprise. Make use of industry standard encryption. Well, there's a whole list of best practices here, which can help you as a developer to make sure that you have a good visibility on what you aim to protect. And it provides recommendations on how to protect it. If from a developer perspective, you want to have an industry standard for this or get a reference there, you can also have a look at the OWASP, the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard, which also goes into security best practices for application developers. So with this, I finalize my presentation, and I would like to give the floor back to Gitanjali.
Thank you so much for this wonderful and informative presentation, Tim. Well, with this, it's time to move on to our next session. So don't forget, you can always reach out and connect with our sponsors, partners, and delegates by clicking on People tab. We will see you on the other side in just a few moments.
5 मिनट में अकाउंट सेटअप और ट्रेडिंग शुरू।
हाँ कर सकते हैं।
नहीं कर सकते।
लगी शर्त और हारा तो It's possible with CoinSwitch Kuber. Download करो और Bitcoin trading start करो. CoinSwitch Kuber, सिक्का चमकेगा.
Cryptocurrency is a non-regulated digital asset, not a legal tender, and subject to market risks and price fluctuation risks.
Where there is life, there is hope, there is meaning. But life has its downs as much as its ups. Life is about challenges. Life is about opportunities. Time for joy, time for celebration, and time to introspect. Thankfully, in every one of life's moments, and even beyond life itself, there's LIC. Where there is life, there's always LIC. Zindagi ke saath bhi, zindagi ke baad bhi.
Welcome to Fago, a pioneer in the world of intelligent open finance. With our full-stack open finance platform, we enable companies to understand their users' financial behavior across various use cases, making finance engaging and actionable. Fago's developer-friendly product stack helps clients with friction-free user onboarding and authentication using trusted account information. Connect and aggregate your users' banking transaction data from any source, either any of the account aggregators or directly from any core banking solution at flexible intervals. Enrich and categorize transaction data using machine learning algorithms to extract deep behavioral attributes of your users. Understand and act on real-time insights powered by your users' behavior for a variety of use cases ranging from lending, wealth, income verification, frauds, to even branding and marketing insights. Engage with your users by embedding our personal finance management SDK in your existing user-facing app to push positive financial habits and personalize financial insights to your users. If you are looking to engage or understand your user base's financial behavior to take informed decisions, Fago is your perfect partner. With the complete Fago suite, you can now capture what drives your users at every stage of their journey and use it to drive your growth. Plug into Fago and let us do the heavy lifting for you.